and congratulations on the ASMA project. I actually binged it all last night to be ready for this.
Uh-oh.
Wow. There is a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
First of all, why did you want to make an analog horror series?
So, I think for me, I come from kind of the world of marketing. I
Mhm,
co-founded a trailer company 20 years ago called Buddha Jones, and one of the things that we were kind of known for was doing kind of genre trailers and mostly
mhm,
horror trailers. And so I loved it, by the way. And most of the really kind of big horror trailers of the past, decade, no question, literally going back 20, 25 years, we were a part of. So I've always loved horror. But I figured I kind of semi-retired from the company, and it was just one of these things. I felt like I had been kind of working in the horror genre and kind of the model of horror for so long that I was starting to hit a little bit of fatigue. I mean, I
mhm,
don't get me wrong. I mean, and I think we're in this incredible golden age of horror now where, you know, um, you've got so many great outlets for the genre, but it just felt like there was so much of it kind of coming out of the studios and some of the independents or some of the kind of the smaller studios that really felt like plugged in. I think post the James Wan years and looking at all those New Line franchises and the Warner Brothers projects that were really
mhm,
great. But I also felt like a lot of it was okay. We've kind of seen this before. It's being dressed up a little differently, but they're trying to hook another franchise.
mhm,
So to me, I always found that like kind of the YouTube culture was always much more kind of cutting edge and meaning doing material, yes, on a much lower budget, but I always felt as though they were creating their world building within
mhm,
the genre that I thought I always admired. I always thought was really, really cool. And so I felt like if I'm going to kind of dive into kind of this genre again, and if I'm going to be kind of doing my own kind of projects and kind of having fun with it, basically.
mhm,
I've always thought analog horror was a really unique subgenre because it is just by its nature, um, you have to be active as an audience member in analog
mhm,
horror. It's not just laid out for you. You have to. It's almost like, and I've had a lot of people say, is the ASMA Journals an augmented reality game or an ARG, because a lot of it is like, wait, am I supposed to be guessing what happens next? And to me, I find that as an audience member, as somebody who's participating, I love that because it activates you more versus kind of more passive viewing where you love the jump scares and you love kind of the stories and you love the characters, but you're not really engaged in kind of either where the story goes or trying to figure out, oh, wait, was that a clue for me? Should
mhm.
I pick that up? Should I have seen that? So to me, I really do find that to be kind of that's part of the analog genre, which I really enjoy. But even more than that, because there's a lot of people that have said that this project is just on the edge of analog. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Because it does kind of it dovetails in and out of contemporary stuff like it's happening like now, but it's
Mhm.
also showing videotapes that you don't know how old it is. So and there are some purists, analog horror purists out there that are um, disapprove, we'll say, because of the fact that I do kind of jump around a little bit, and it doesn't all just take place on a VCR.
Mhm.
So, but yeah, it really I think analog is super cool. And the other thing, I feel like we're seeing kind of a growth into some mainstream that is focused on
Mhm.
some of these efforts. Like I look at like a movie like Skinamarink that was, given its
Mm.
budget, was a huge success. Well, there's an audience for that. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, and it's not just an audience that's sitting and watching it on YouTube too. There's an audience that's willing to, go to their streamer
Mhm.
or, rent it or buy it or even incredibly, even perhaps go to a theater to see it.
Mhm.
So
Definitely. And this project in particular, it has elements of found footage, it has elements of true crime. It, you know, it's very suspenseful. How do you build something like that up and still keep it very unique? It seems almost experimental at points.
yeah, well, that's, that's a good description. It does get almost experimental, but I mean, to me, that to me is about kind of mood and tone, you
Hmm.
know. And I think back to um uh certain like you know, some of my young memories of horror are just their moments. They aren't necessarily kind of story arcs.
Hmm.
They're just these kind of creepy moods and feels and you the sense of anxiety that kind of that can grow in you. And so I think that can happen on a level where it is, bless you. I think I think that can happen um, just by kind of setting a particular tone
Hmm.
and or kind of manipulating things a certain way. So you don't have to necessarily be that invested in kind of a character or story to feel a certain amount of anxiety. And you see this a lot
Hmm.
in a lot of YouTube horror. You see great you know, and again, kind of focusing on analog horror, it is a little experimental
Hmm.
because it just by its nature, because my feeling is that a lot of analog horror comes from acknowledging kind of limitations, meaning either budgetary limitations or you can't go out and hire a crew. You know, I mean, it's you know, it's a lot of work, and so you know, analog horror allows individuals to actually kind of create stories and kind of and using their computer kind of create that world in that world. And to me, I feel as though that just by its nature lends itself to being a little bit more experimental, a little bit more
Hmm.
about mood and tone versus, okay, I have to give a whole kind of backstory to something, or I have to kind of create a whole lore, even though there is a lot of lore in the analog, sorry, the ASMA journals. This is there are kind of non sequitur horror moments,
Hmm.
is what I would call them. And you know, there's a great, I'm sure you're aware of this, or some of your audience members probably know about. There's a great series on YouTube called Doors
Hmm.
that is fantastic, and I think you know, and I look at that and I think that viewership should be much higher because those guys are doing some really cool stuff. Like I think that series is really creepy and very unsettling, and you can tell you know they don't have a big crew. It looks like they're you know they're doing kind of their
Hmm.
own kind of visual effects, but it really gets under your skin, and I love that. And and again, it just proves the fact that you can grab your camera, you can grab your computer, you can grab a buddy or two, and you can go do this. You know,
Hmm.
and to me, I feel like that's what I find so exciting about it. So, by its nature, sometimes low budget can feel a little experimental
Hmm.
because of the fact that you know you don't have all the bells and whistles, but I do think it can be really effective.
Definitely. And going talking about a little bit about going into that mainstream element, David Lynch did this very well, and he had such a huge following that his stuff is considered mainstream, even though it's extremely experimental.
Yes.
For you building this up, how do you begin to set a tone, set a pace for a project like this that does at times feel jarring and like you are watching something that is happening as you're watching it, not recorded.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, you know, that's a great question. I think I'm, I'm an editor first. That's kind of how at the very, very beginning of my career, I edited trailers and that was kind of my focus. And I feel like, um, that kind of never goes away, whether you go into production or writing or whatever it might be, you're still using those kind of editorial muscles. And I think that is, as far as setting a tone or a pace to some of this stuff, that's where I can kind of lean back on those
Mhm.
skills that after having, you know, I'm not a young guy, so I mean, having done editorial for so long, I think it has granted me the opportunity to, you know, editorial is a tool, and it's a very, very big tool in the language of cinema or media, just not cinema, but just media in general, right? It's how we put our images together. And you see these conventions are changing all the time.
Mhm.
You know, right now, editorials, I look at things online sometimes and I'm like, oh my God, it's just the editorial level is just amazing. And we're also reaching a level where some of it's even being done kind of without humans,
Mhm.
which is also really interesting. And
Yeah.
we could talk about that if you want. But I think to go back to your question about being able to set the tone or the pace, I think a lot of that really does come down to years of editing um, and being able to also know the conventions and work the conventions because that does happen a lot. Like marketing editorial is very specific, and trailer editorial is very
Mhm.
specific too. The idea is like, how long do you hold before the scare happens? And that timing, doing years of working on that kind of, I think, gives you, um, it's almost happens on an unconscious level when you're kind of putting things together, like, oh, that works, that's cool, okay, and then you kind of move on. So I can't really say I'm really conscious of how I do it. It just more or less kind of happens. But
Mhm.
again, just to go back to your point about David Lynch, I mean,
Mhm.
truly the Maverick, like you don't get much better than that.
Mhm.
And I would argue your point is spot on, which is that guy just made what he wanted to
Mhm.
make, and then he got the industry to catch up with him. And that those are Mavericks. I mean, those are incredible. He's an extraordinary kind of filmmaker and artist. I mean, the guy was building furniture and
Mhm.
photography. I mean, the guy was extraordinary, no question, and incredibly versatile in his filmmaking too, by
Mhm.
the way. Like, I know, I mean, obviously, when you think of Lynch, you think of, Lost Highway or Eraserhead, but, you look at, there are some extraordinarily very classic storytelling, like Straight Story about a guy who drives his lawnmower across the West.
Yeah.
Like, and it's beautiful and simple and, anyway, but I think to your point, yeah, there's a, there are filmmakers that are out there that take risks and that either people kind of keep up with them
Mhm.
uh, or they kind of fall away and that's okay if that happens too. Like I do,
Mhm.
again, to go back to the Skinamarink film, like I what got me going about Skinamarink was I saw the trailer, and coming from a trailer background I was just like, what? I was
Mhm.
like, this is freaking like killer with just these very simple kind of retro
Mhm.
images and just that tone and that voice, in this house, at these different levels. Like that was, and again, I know tons of men and women in, trailer marketing. When that trailer came out, they were just like, what the,
Mhm.
and that to me is that's not following a convention. That's absolutely kind of creating its own rules and people followed along to a point
Mhm.
where that movie did great. So
Yeah, definitely. And going with that, you're creating this mythology, this world, this universe in this series. How far are you planning to take it? We're on episode 11, and it doesn't seem that it's slowing down towards any kind of end.
yeah, it's yeah, I feel like I'm kind of putting myself into a bit of a difficult situation in the fact that posting weekly it can be
Mm-hmm.
hard
Mm-hmm.
because you're constantly trying to I mean you're trying to kind of keep up on the production end. I mean, the arc is there, meaning the story is there. It's just the production, getting it done in a timely manner, it can be challenging. But
Mm-hmm.
we're close. I'll say we're close to this arc coming kind of to an end, and then potentially another one starting. So, but I do, it's interesting. There is. There's a genre, the backrooms genre,
Mm-hmm.
which is really, really popular, and obviously online and YouTube, it's extraordinary. And Kane Pixels, who kind of created that genre, basically. Uh, it was interesting. I saw an interview with him because there's a lot of people that are just like, where is he going with this?
Mm-hmm.
And I like that his mindset was like, Oh no, no, it's all laid out. It's all in my head. It's just going to get there. And I think every good kind of storyteller has to have
Mhm.
that, or filmmaker has to have that. Um, so rest assured, it does have a beginning, middle, and an end. And we're probably starting to ramp down to the
Mhm.
end. But then the idea is there's another one that comes up from underneath it, which is kind of why I called it the
Mhm.
journals, basically. So some of these stories will intersect. Um, but I also know that, the reason I bring that up is because I do think there are some producers out there, or excuse me, influencers, creators, whatever we want to call them, that are out there creating materials and stories
Mhm.
that are really cool. But I don't know if I feel as though there's an ending versus a kind of stream of consciousness kind of thing that's kind of happening. And it's weird though, but I have no judgment on that. Like, meaning to
Mhm.
me, that's kind of cool too, because we're in this kind of this new world of like genre bending. And so, I don't feel like you have to absolutely know where your ending is or where it's going. But the kind of the traditionalist in me feels like, yeah, you should. So there's an ending coming.
Awesome. Well, it's a fantastic series so far. I can't wait to see where you're taking this because I am engulfed in this universe that you've created, and I really want to see more stories come from it because it is a fascinating series that you've created. So,
Yeah. Well, I
congrat
appreciate that. Thank you very much, Jesus. I appreciate that. It's nice. I appreciate
congratulations,
the
and
words.
thank you very much for your time.
Okay, bud. All right, you take care.
You too.